S. Oh, thank you, Lee. So good morning and welcome to the RIAC Learning Series. My name is Vanessa Brewer and I am the Regional Interagency Council Program Administrator, and my co-host is Lee Taylor. Lee is the State Interagency Council Program Administrator, and we both work at the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities. And before we get started with our session today, I just want to remind you that the RIAC Learning Series sessions have been scheduled through June of this year. And they are always on the first Friday of the month at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And information for the monthly sessions, as well as the registration link for each, is provided on the RIAC Learning Series flyer, and we'll put that in the chat box. Anyone is welcome to attend these sessions. This series was created to support the work of RIAC and regional system of care efforts. So please feel free to share this information about the sessions with anyone that might be interested. And in the coming months, we will release the RIAC Learning Series session schedule for July through December, so stay tuned. Our presentation today is titled 988, a Behavioral Health Crisis Transformation. Our speaker is Beck Whipple. He's Kentucky Statewide Suicide Prevention Coordinator. And before I turn it over to Beck, I just wanted to share a few housekeeping items. So if you haven't already, please mute your mic. Also, as you've seen, this workshop is being recorded and it's going to be posted on the RIAC YouTube channel. And we'll put the link to that YouTube channel on the RIAC webpage in the chat box. You may use the chat box for questions and or comments. So Lee and I will be monitoring that throughout the session. We just spoke with Beck when he first got on here, just to make sure that he was okay if we stopped to address some of those questions along the way. He said that that's completely fine. He would like for this to be like a conversation. So if you've got a question, you can unmute or you can put it in the chat box, whatever you feel comfortable with. A session link or a session evaluation link will be posted in the chat box towards the end of the session. So please take a moment to complete that. And as always, certificates of attendance are available by request. So please email me if you'd like to have one, and I'll put my email in the chat box. So please join me in welcoming Beck Whipple.
Hello, everyone. Very nice to be with you. Is that better? The mic? Okay, lots of head nods. Great. Enthusiastic. Great. Welcome to your Friday. And as Lee mentioned, a Friday that's on the brink of a spring weekend. So how awesome is that? Hope everybody gets some vitamin D therapy, whatever that looks like for you. We are going to be talking about 988. So I'm going to share my screen. And I know a lot of the names and faces of you all, so please, you guys know me, I know you a little bit. So again, this is your all's time, and I want to make it as relevant for you and your questions. So please, as you go through, just, hit me up. All right. Everybody see the screen. Okay, let me rearrange some. Oh, I might not be able to do that. Can you still see the PowerPoint? Okay, I'm rearranging so I can see your all's faces and the chat. All right, so let's get started. 988. I'm looking at Christy Penn's amazing face here, and Christy and I have been in 988 land for over the past 2 years. We've been living and breathing and building and talking and all of this good stuff about 988. So as Christy, if you see things that I've missed, this is as much yours as mine and anybody else's. So please fill in as you see fit. All right, but before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I guess I have really small ear holes. So these like iPhone things, they just never stay in. I hate it. Now y'all know a little bit about me personally. So yeah, speaking of which, this is me. I use male pronouns, he, him, his. This incredible person on the first picture has agreed that I'm not too bad to hike with. So she's my partner, Liz. And the other pictures are my animals, Mamba. Oh, slide didn't move. Okay, hold on. Oh, where did you all go? There we go. Okay, now can you see? Okay, there we go. Just one ear hole particularly, anyways. All right, so yeah, you'll see Liz right there. If you have not been to Lily Mount Overlook in Estill County, please take a look. That's where that's at. It's kind of on the same ridge line as the Pinnacles near Brea. But this is my cat and my dog, Benson and Mamba. They use me as housing and a food provider. Sometimes they snuggle me, but that's about it. You'll see down here with the two kids and the giant tree, this is us in the Pacific Northwest. These are my two god kids, Silas and Jude. They've been remarkable lights in my lives. The middle picture is my 5 nieces and nephews. And now they're all very clearly in their 20s, and over 3/5 of them are married. So this is a very old picture, but it's just so cute. I can't always I just have to share it. But these are my sisters, and in the bottom left are my besties. You guys might recognize T. Gonzalez from Louisville, but these are my folks that keep me good and solid and grounded and cared for and all of those things. I also am a donut connoisseur, but this gluten thing is really starting to affect me. So we're looking at maybe having to break up with donuts, and I will need a lot of support when and if that needs to happen. So please, send something other than donuts. But we had our coworker yesterday be like, "Hey, I'm bringing in Poppy's," which is a donut shop in Frankfurt, and I was like, "Oh." Anyways, so I also am a homeowner and a novice handyman. Spend a lot of time at Menards. They kind of know me by face. So yeah, but kind of relevant to this conversation and to my job, I am a trans man and also a person with lived experience of suicide. So whenever I speak of suicide, I'm kind of talking a little bit as kind of a content area expert, but primarily as a person with lived experience who've, kind of had my own journey. So, and it's for me, that also means that I highly value and want to build relationships with other folks who have lived and lost experience so that we can kind of create the system that we needed or that helped us and kind of, use that collective wisdom. So, yeah, I hope in anything that you're talking about with suicide or suicide prevention that we're encouraging you to use the voice of lived and lost experience because it is such a guiding North Star. So thanks for that. So this is me. This is how I'm kind of coming into this space. So I appreciate Vanessa and Lee the invitation to talk and just appreciate being able to share with you all myself and also the work that is being done around 988. So this is a pause. I've mentioned suicide already a couple times, and it is a staple for me that we don't forsake our own humanity in learning and talking about suicide. We don't get outside of our own windows of tolerance. So this is a pause that we are going to be mentioning and talking about suicide today. So as you know, and you can see this webinar is being recorded, and you can come back to it. So check in with yourself. Do an actual kind of body scan, pause, do I have it in me today to talk and hear about suicide? And it is okay if you don't. We will send you the recording and all of our best wishes. But so yeah, just check in because suicide prevention for me starts within my own brain and body, and we build from there. So I encourage you to do the same. We're pausing 7 seconds. All right. I think that was 7-ish. All right. So this is going to be interactive, somewhat interactive. All of us at the Division for Behavioral Health went through this fancy facilitation training that EKU provides. If you haven't been through it, you should go through it. It's really great. Stephanie and her group at the EK Center, they're just fabulous. So there's a little plug. I don't know if we're allowed to do that, but I'm doing it. So we are going to think and use our collective wisdom to think about why what it happens in the world around you or with someone or just in general that would make you think you need to call someone who might be in a mental health crisis? What are the warning signs of suicide, warning signs of like a mental health crisis? So that's the question. And this is how we're going to do this. This is blank for a reason. So if you haven't already, I want you to go up to your sharing the screen and we're going to annotate. So if you go up to where it says you're looking at Beck's screen and you can click over there, I want you to hit the T for text, and I want you to on this screen write what you might know as a suicide or behavioral health crisis warning sign. What are we looking for? How do we know when we might need to be the person to call or when we might need to encourage someone else or call for someone? Did I explain the annotate very well? I don't know if I did or not. I'm seeing a lot of like, faces. Is annotate allowed? Do you have it set up?
I'm sorry, Beck. I didn't know you were going to do that. I'm checking settings right now to see if I can turn it on.
Surprise me. If not, let's use the chat. Let's use the chat. We can just do that. That'll be where we're at. So in the chat, oh, Christy, not see it. Okay, good. So in the chat, just put, what do you know? What do you know about suicide or behavioral health, mental health warning signs? Giving away personal belongings. Yep. Just, thoughts. Absolutely. Absolutely. Talking about death, saying goodbyes. Yep. Hopelessness is a huge, huge one. Yep. Signs of depressions, talking about it, isolating. Absolutely. Describing pain, statements about intent, withdrawing. Absolutely. See, you guys don't even need me. Withdrawing from things, wanting the pain to stop. Susan, that's huge, right? Suicide isn't kind of, it isn't the thing, it's the thing that folks believe will stop the pain and the intolerable suffering that they're experiencing. So it's usually a symptom of severe psychological ache and pain, right? Giving away possessions, that's for sure. Seeing no solutions. Self-harming could potentially be for sure connected. There's non-suicidal self-harm, and then there's suicidal harm. There's self-harm with the intent. So yeah, always looking for intent, definitely. There's, situational things, any kind of transition in a person's life from high school to, non-high school, whether that be college or not, from working career to, retirements, from being in active service to not being in active service, from being mobile, autonomous person that is full function of their body to having something that is affecting their body, like a diagnosis or a physical ailment that might prohibit mobility or autonomy. Trauma. Yeah, folks that have ACEs, 4 or more ACEs, are 6 times more likely to die by suicide. So trauma is definitely a kind of at the base, right? Grieving, yes, losing someone, in particular, if that loss is by they've lost someone through suicide. So whatever, there's lots of study and research that needs to happen, but we know that if someone has lost someone to suicide, that increases their risk factors for suicide. So being aware and really wrapping around, we do it's not one of the worst things. It is the worst part of my job, is to do child fatality reviews. And we always make sure that we are working with communities and families that have lost folks to suicide, that we're wrapping around them, that we are supporting them, getting them resources. Just, my friend and kind of fellow suicidologist, Tony Watkins, he says suicide is often the no casserole death. The death that happens that folks in the community are like, what do I do with my hands? I don't know. Do I talk about it? Do I not talk about it? Well, I encourage anybody that is supporting someone, take the casserole over, let them know that they're not the pariah, or, that you are still there, you still care for them, that you are there to be a support. So depression for sure, stop treatment. and stopping treatment, as well as talking about substance use, a return to use is a significant factor for suicide risk factor. For suicide, like a suicide warning sign risk factor. So being able to think of that. Yep, sudden and erratic behavior changes. And also one of the things that doesn't get talked about, I think, enough when we talk about warning signs is a drastic mood change for the positive. So I worked with a young person and kind of had serious chronic mental health concerns, and really the demeanor was just kind of very, very slow, very low energy, right? And then all of a sudden, she just had so much levity and brightness and hope, and that is a warning sign. We were all like, oh, great. There's we've turned this corner. And really internally, she had kind of made the decision to die. And so, and in fact, did go on to die by suicide. So you got to think about those drastic behavior, moods changes, especially, and maybe if they're, for the positive. I don't like to add the quantitative part to negative and positive behaviors, but the ones that you're like, okay. Yes, Michelle, absolutely. We're going to be sending some KIP data out for the first time since the KIP survey, I think it's Kentucky Initiatives for Prevention. We ask about gender and sexual identity, and it made me sick to my stomach to see the results of our LGBT youth and how this is affecting them. So I'm looking at Dusty and the co-ops and some of that stuff, and I'll be sharing that with you all very soon. All right. So I think we have a good collection of knowledge about when to call, right? So 988, we've been using someone to talk to, someone to respond, and a community to support. Those are the kind of three phases of 988. So we want to, think about what are they? What is the things that we might need to think about when we have someone to talk to? So thank you, and Lee, I apologize again for throwing that annotate at you. We just made it work, right? Because that's also what EKU taught us, is to be flexible. Think on our toes. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. So what is 988? But before we get started with 988, let's back up. What was it? What has it been, right? So the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and you're going to hear me refer to that as NSPL or Lifeline. Like many of the things we work with daily, we create short names for them or shortened versions for them. So the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, NSPL or the Lifeline, started back in 2005. It started in New York as a call center, and that New York call center was Vibrant Emotional Health. So Vibrant is who owns and operates and accredits and does all of the stuff for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. We have been working with them, Christy, myself, and the group have been working with Vibrant for the last 2 years to figure out, and again, Vibrant is funded through SAMHSA. So SAMHSA, Vibrant, they create all of these local call centers, right? So the way that their philosophy is we don't want one call center that we don't know, because there's regional things that we, folks need to know about, right? And so they've said, we don't want just one national call center where folks are calling in from everywhere. We want to decentralize this. We want to make sure that there are regional call centers. So Vibrant has worked with a whole bunch of different kind of folks. In Kentucky, I'll share our network, but they work with lots of folks to think about 211, for example. Some 211 call centers are also National Suicide Prevention Lifeline accredited. But they've said, hey, we want to decentralize. We want to make sure states and regions have their own folks answering the phone because they are the best to know what suicide drivers might be in that area and kind of know that colloquialisms. Is that the right word, colloquialisms? Anyways, you know what I'm talking about. Also, my girlfriend Liz, who I showed you a picture of, she had the brilliant idea, this is a little tangent, that we need to create a GPS system that navigates using the voice and dialect of that region. So like, they'll be like, oh, at the the barn with the red roof, take a left. But like, it would be, right? Isn't that genius? I mean, anyways, she's pretty smart. Not pretty smart, she's super smart. Hey, okay, so sorry, I digress. All right, so here's our NSPL. NSPL, National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. That is the 1-800-273-TALK. So all of those things are the same. Lifeline, NSPL, National Suicide, they all equal right now that 1-800-273-TALK number. Okay, so what makes them, great? So Lifelines, again, has national support. They have a national vibrant kind of headquarters that do all of this, but they support the local folks, right? And they said, hey, we know that when someone calls, they're going to need to, have pretty quick access to, ongoing behavioral health support. So a lot of the call centers they've used, those 180 throughout the nation, a lot of them are directly tied into a system like a community mental health system that has access to mobile crisis, that has access to outpatient, inpatient, all of those kind of things. So they really have kind of said, let's partner with folks who are in the region and also who have access and direct control or support to those kind of follow-up services, right? And I mentioned already that the Lifeline Crisis Centers, they make the local connection. They know who to, a lot of times we surveyed crisis callers this last year. And, in addition to the kind of like depression, mental health stuff, we heard a lot from them that callers are talking about finances, that callers are talking about worrying about employment, right? And so when we use those local centers, they know who can do rental assistance in the area, or who can do assistance with mortgage payments, or who can help with utilities. They know who that unemployment office is. And so we are able to kind of help them connect, that caller, help them connect to those supports that might decrease that crisis driver. The other thing is that these callers that call into the 1-800 number, 95% of them are answered within 60 seconds. So we know when you're in crisis that every ring feels like an eternity. And most of them are answered honestly between 15 and 30 seconds, depending upon how it works. The thing that folks I really want to brag on our call centers is that about 80 to 85% of callers in Kentucky, about 80 to 85% of callers, that crisis is resolved with a conversation. That they are able to, and this is different than the 911 dispatch, where if you call 911, their job is to get you to someone or to get someone to you. The 988 or NSPO call taker, their first and primary job is to kind of talk with you, and they'll do a risk assessment, all of that. But their job primarily is to de-escalate that situation using a conversation and using that phone call and active listening and empathy and all of these things, de-escalation training, all of these things that they are experts at. We were trying to build our capacity for call takers. I was like, why don't we use student interns? And the call takers kind of laughed at me because they're like, Beck, it takes us a semester to train our call takers. That's how much experience they have. So I like to brag on them about that. But the thing is too, like, what better way, right? To get someone to just be able to hear, to talk with, not have to go anywhere or do any of those kind of things. Not that that's not an option through the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, but the priority is to just be able to listen. And you can kind of see here that a lot of the folks, again, the majority of folks will feel better just after that call, and will not need significant long-term ongoing support, even though that they make sure that that's available if they choose so. I think too, the one thing that the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, one of the biggest things is that it's confidential. They're never going to ask your name. They're never going to ask like who you are, where you're at, any of those kind of things. Any information they ask or they get about that caller is voluntary. Now we'll say they will ask you if you're a farmer or farm family in Kentucky, but that's only because it helps us kind of figure out kind of where our farmers are at. So that's the kind of national. And also remember that the National Suicide Prevention Line, even though it says suicide in the job title or in the title, it's about any kind of emotional distress. And you don't have to be all the way to the brink of being suicidal or having thoughts of or behaviors of suicide to call. You can call. We want folks to call early and call often, and that way we're getting them kind of before they get to this crisis. Also, something that's not very often advertised is that I can call, or anybody can call, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline on behalf of someone else. So I'm going to use Christy for an example. They call that third party calling. So if I'm, if I'm worried about Christy is like kind of texting me some, somewhat worrisome things, right? And I'm worried and I don't know. And I've said, hey, Christy, what about calling? And she's like, no. If I'm worried enough, I can call myself on Christy's behalf, and I have them in my ear saying, hey, ask about this, or, talk about this, or, they're there to help guide me as someone who might be interacting with someone who is having a behavioral or emotional crisis. So that's not often as advertised, but it is possible. So really like to make sure folks know that. All right. So what does the call look like? This is the life of a lifeline call. First, somebody dials the now 10-digit number, 1-800-273-TALK. It rings, usually about 3 to 4 times. The national vibrant call magic. So that number goes to this national call bank. And based on its area code and the first 3 digits of its number, it gets routed to the assigned primary call center. So in Kentucky, we do that by counties. So I have a 502 area code, and my first 3 are 598. So Lifeline, the little magic hub up here in Vibrant's world, it says, hey, this number is calling from Kentucky, specifically Jefferson County in Kentucky. I'm going to send this call to 7 County Services because that's their designated primary call center. And I'm going to show you a map in a minute about our call centers. So that rings, and hopefully Geneva Robinson and her group, they pick me up and they say, hey, Beck, what's up? No, not really. They wouldn't say that. They would say, and you're also, I failed to mention this. The very first thing that you hear when you call the 1-800 number is a voice prompt for 3 things. Press 1 if you're a veteran. Press 2 if you would like to speak to someone in Spanish. Right? And then the third one, it was like, just stay on the line, or if you stay on the line, someone will be with you shortly. I see the question about disposable phones and Google phones. The thing right now is 988, unlike 911, does not use geolocation. So they aren't using my location signal on my phone to tell me where I'm at and to route me to that local center. So, Michelle, that is a phenomenal question that I probably actually need to know the answer to, but I don't. So thank you for bringing that up. But what will happen is it gets sent somewhere. The beauty of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is it will be answered. Depending upon where and who answers it, depends on routing, all of that good stuff. So that's a great question, Michelle. Let me find out about that. I have not gotten that question before. Right now, with the development of 988, the FCC is currently awaiting a vote to be able to see if 988 or, again, I'm going to define all this later, or if the NSPL calls can use geolocation. So geolocation has its benefits and geolocation has its barriers. The part about that makes the crisis line or the NSPL line so attractive to some is the autonomy. And if you add geolocation to it, you're losing a bit of autonomy. And also, there's this thing called active rescue. Active rescue is a part of every single National Suicide Prevention Lifeline call. When someone answers this call, they will do a risk formulation on every caller. And that risk formulation is, again, evidence-based. Folks are very trained on it. And it will put every single caller at a low risk, medium risk, high risk, and imminent risk. If someone is in an imminent risk, that typically means they have some kind of weapon or some very accessible in their hands means to hurt themselves, to kill themselves, and or to hurt or kill other folks. So when they've deemed someone as an imminent risk, what happens is the 988 operator or National Suicide Prevention Lifeline person, they will, behind the scenes, initiate an active rescue. So that's the word that folks use. That active rescue, as of right now, is law enforcement. And so you can imagine some communities are when you add law enforcement, you are increasing the risk of that distress and stuff like that. So I like to be real clear about that. And any kind of advertisement you'll get about 988 or the NSPO will talk about that active rescue. So just let's go back to our screen. I took on a little tangent, although it was super helpful. So if you'll see this orange, if my primary call center, so if Geneva here in 7 counties, if their call takers are all busy, and all of this call software knows this, it will say, oh, Geneva's not available. Let's send back to the backup. Because again, this is emergency. We need to have a primary and a backup call center. Right now, majority of the counties in Kentucky will be sent to a backup call center in New York or Miami. Those are our backups for right now. We're building on that. I'll talk to you about that in a minute. So it gets answered, whether that's a primary call center or a backup call center. And the backup call centers, if default, are Miami and New York, unless somebody like myself or the person in my position says, you know what, we're going to have another regional center, another Kentucky center take up backup calls. So that's the goal. All right. So we get answered. All of this happens. The caller there's lots of different things that can happen during the call. They can set up follow-up services. They can set up next day appointments in a lot of areas. They can dispatch mobile crisis in a lot of areas. And, we're building on the mobile crisis piece for sure. And like I said, law enforcement, EMS can also be dispatched. And what I've said, and I'll say it until I'm blue in the face, and this is my true honest belief, is I'm a homeowner. And if I have a plumbing issue and I call a plumber and an electrician shows up, that person might be the very, very best electrician, but my need in that moment is a plumber, right? And so this is not to say that law enforcement, all of those folks are not an amazing electricians, but we know that in that moment, that person might need needing that plumber or that behavioral health crisis person. So I like to be real clear about that, that we all bring our skills and talents, but, kind of thinking about what is the specialized care that person might be needing. All right. Any questions so far? Everybody doing okay? So that's the 500,000 foot umbrella of what happens to an NSPL call.
Hey, Beck, can I interrupt you just for a second? So Susan Robinson had a question, and she said, does caller have to give their location or just the active rescue then trigger the geolocation?
Well, so geolocation is not a possibility through any part of the NSPL call at this point. So what happens if someone says they are imminent risk, they will, that call taker is trained to try to get some information from them, where are you at, what's around you, who's around you, kind of those things. And a lot of the time, well, not a lot of time, I need to actually find the specific number because we can now track that. A majority of the time when an active rescue is dispatched by the call takers, some of those folks don't end up being found. And so that is something too that we, is a benefit of geolocation, is that we can, and also because I told you this whole like national routing hub, we had an experience in our Adonta region where someone called, it got routed to the Adonta region, which is in South Central Kentucky, or more Central Kentucky. But so they were calling, they were talking, and that they needed they were in imminent risk, so they needed an active rescue, and they gave the person an address, a street and a house name. And so Adonta furiously dispatched like law enforcement EMS to this location. And they got there and the person was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. They were very, very surprised at the response of law enforcement and at their door, because what had happened was that person was actually in South Carolina, and that street and that address just happened to coincide with a street and an address in their region. And so because that person had lived and gotten a cell phone in Kentucky that had those 3-digit area code, they had moved to South Carolina, but NSPL was like, Adonta. So that's again a barrier to kind of what we're working with right now. We need our folks to know each other so intricately well that we can, assess like, hey, here's the 988 person in whatever county, South Carolina. So there's lots of room for growth in our response to 988 or NSPL calls, but also really kind of how do we stay grounded in the nature that this is a confidential call. People are calling in a way that is, they know what they're signing up for when they call. So there's a lot of discussion nationally and within our state on what's the best practice, what is the most person-centered way of responding. So to be continued, I guess. This is a question. This is the answer to that one. But I hope I answered your question, Susan. All right, so how does this work in Kentucky? I told you the national landscape, all of that. So Kentucky uses our community mental health center region. So we have 14 regions. Again, a lot of you are probably way more intimately aware of these regions than myself, but we have these regions. Our call centers are located and are a part of our community mental health center crisis services. So the community mental health centers have crisis services that range from this call center to mobile crisis to CSUs, to some folks have residential. So that's and Christy, please add if I missed anything about the crisis services offered by our community mental health centers. But the part that I work directly with is our call center directors. So if they are in a dark green region, that means that their call center is nationally accredited or NSPL accredited. So they've went through, it's about a year and a half long process. They were working with Vibrant, the owner of NSPL, they were working with Vibrant to become accredited, meaning they have a specific set of clinical standards, of clinical practice, all of the, like, they didn't wake up, and say one day, I'm going to be a call center. And then like they just were. All of these folks in the green went through a very thorough process to do and to learn and to act in a way that's kind of best practice for those callers. If you see the light green areas, those are areas that are onboarding or an active kind of process of becoming accredited. I'm looking at some North Key folks here. Hey, Susan, your North Key folks are great. So they are and will be accredited, some of them as early as like April 30th of this year. And some, hopefully, we're going to get everybody accredited by July of 2022. So Kentucky River, Jamie, your crew, Vicey and the crew there at Kentucky River, they're actively onboarding. They've signed a contract. They're ready to just do some stuff. So when I mentioned that calls were routed by counties, this is the routing. These are the county structures that we have used. So every county in the Kentucky River region, those calls will go directly to Vicey and the crisis call centers at Kentucky River. Comprehend, who you see up here, they have 5 counties and they have 5 small counties. So as a total, they got less than 100 calls, less than 100 NSPL calls per year. And they were like, and to become accredited, you have to have certain things. And it takes a good infrastructure shift to become accredited. Like you can't have calls forwarded to cell phones. You can't have, there's a lot of benchmarks that you have to meet. And Comprehend did an environmental scan of their services. And for 100 calls, they were like, we have to rebuild almost everything in our call center to be able to become accredited. Let's just contract with someone who is accredited. So their calls will be covered and through contract by one of the either surrounding call centers or by our Pennyroyal Center. So that's no slight to Comprehend. They did a thorough assessment and recognized that, kind of the lift at this point for the number of calls they were getting, it would not be, kind of feasible. So I've mentioned a couple times backups, right? So these are the green means primary. So those are the first call centers that ring to. The second, the backup centers, and this is one of the biggest parts of our lift in the next couple of years, is we want to have this whole map, all 120 counties, covered not only by a primary Kentucky center, but a backup Kentucky center. So for example, if I'm down here in Graves County, I think this is Graves, forgive me if I'm wrong. If I'm down here on the left hand, like Western Kentucky and Graves County, and Miss Doris at Four Rivers, her call center is busy. Right now, 4 or 5 rings, busy. Okay, now I'm going right. So now the backup center is now Pennyroyal. So we're going through 2 gates to make sure that our Kentuckians are talking to fellow Kentuckians who know our, who know our neighbors. I mean, we've seen time and time again how incredible our Kentucky response is, in crisis. We watched it in Western Kentucky, when the tornadoes hit. People in Kentucky will just pick up and support fellow Kentuckians in those moments. And that's what we really are building on here. So all of these blue counties right now, they're covered by Pennyroyal. And Pennyroyal is in a special contract with us through the Rural Suicide Prevention project. And we have special funding to help ensure that our rural farming communities are our first kind of backup emphasis. So we know that rural folks, again, I'm from rural Kansas. We know that rural folks like to talk to rural folks, right? And so they have a primary and a backup center that is rural based. I'm looking at my time here. Okay, doing okay. All right, so what does this mean? So we, since 2016, we're all averaging, answering about 13,000 NSPL calls a year. You can see from this map that our growth of NSPL calls answered has really skyrocketed. And so we've had about a 40% increase in calls answered in Kentucky. And that is all in about the call centers developing this capacity to becoming accredited and taking this. So over the last year, since the beginning of, our dear friend COVID, not a friend, we have seen not only an increase of calls answered in in our Kentucky call centers, but we've seen an increase in callers. So we've seen more people calling. These are more first-time callers. And during the kind of civil unrest, racial unrest in Louisville, we saw first-time younger Black, primarily male callers to our 7 counties region. We see weird spikes in these numbers for whatever October 10th of 2020. We had over 100 calls that day, when really we usually average between 50 and 60. So I look at these numbers quite often and try to do like, what's happening? What's going on? And we saw anytime the governor did a briefing that involved our school systems, we saw increase in calls the next day, or that day or the next day. And we know again, that there is a direct kind of relationship between our education and parents feeling in crisis and or kids feeling in crisis. And most of our callers are above the age of 20, 25. So mostly these are parents calling. So yeah, it was weird, a weird thing. And I don't think it was about the governor talking about school. I think it was the result of what was happening in our schools. And Dusty, I'd love to talk with you more about that in our co-ops to figure out kind of what that might have looked like. So yeah, we saw an increase in callers from Kentucky. And this slide shows that we've answered more of those calls. So not only did we see more calls, but we answered more of those calls in that primary setting that did not go to backup in Miami and New York. And again, no illness for Miami and New York. They just don't know Kentucky. So you will see this is a timestamp that we've done over the last year. 2 years. So we got a grant in early 2019, or late 2019 that started. We contracted with 3 centers to kind of answer some of these calls outside of their region. And then we worked really, really hard. Christy and David and I worked really, really hard with these regions to become accredited. So in October of 2020, our Pathways region became our 10th or 9th call center that came on board. So anybody familiar with the game Risk, right? Where you like create a front and then move your front and then anyways. So that's kind of what we did with our calls. So when a center came online, so when Pathways came on board, they were initially being covered by the Pennyroyal region under contract. But when they came on board, those calls became answered by Pathways, and Pennyroyal then moved to cover more counties. So we used the little Risk pieces and to cover counties. So that was really the image. I'd like for you to see me behind the scenes, like moving the Risk pieces. And that's how we really expanded our calls, or that's how we really increased our calls. We went from 48% answered in Kentucky when I started in 2019. We went to, and now we average high 70s. We've went up all the way to 81% answered by Kentuckians, or by Kentucky call centers. So super, super, super proud of the work of the call centers. Then in January of, March, we added New Vista as an accredited call center. And this was huge because you all know how many counties New Vista covers. 17 counties now had primary coverage in Kentucky and also had backup coverage. So that was huge. And again, we're going to be adding Communicare, Kentucky River, and North Key very, very soon. And it's going to just keep growing. So this is the map, the numbers that really kept Christy and I awake at night. Because this is our shift from NSPL, right? All of this has been happening under that 10-digit number. When we go to 988, it's going to be easier to remember. So therefore, folks are going to be calling it more. And we have to make sure that we have people to answer the phones. So the projected call growth in the first 2 years alone, you can see is incredible. Also, they're really going to be increasing. So traditionally, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline has only been a call center. Because we live in the times that we do, they're really encouraging call centers to also take text and chats. So that is also something that we're building. Now, this would be all well and good if the only calls that our call centers took was NSPL. They could handle that, no problem. But our CMHC call centers, they have a lot of lines that they answer. So every CMHC by contract has to have an adult local toll-free number. They have to have a child local toll-free number, and they have to have an IDD number. And some of them are under contracts to answer phones like problem gambling or the child abuse reporting number. There's some other lines that take up. So the NSPL calls are a fraction of the calls that these call centers take right now. So imagine if 911 took problem gambling, took abuse reporting, took, right now 911 they take one call, right? They take one, and they have to kind of divvy up where that call goes. But the one of the biggest things we've seen as a barrier for our call centers is that they take a lot of calls. So, and that's now what we will probably see is that as 988 becomes more advertised, recognizable, familiar, what we'll probably see is our 988 calls go up and our local toll-free numbers go down. Even though they're going into the same call center, we're anticipating kind of this thing, right? Which is problematic for some CMHCs because they use that toll-free number for, familiarity, for scheduling, for all of these kind of things. So just to kind of put that out there as a huge thing. So if you see a call taker, just say thank you because they're doing a lot. Now, we did a needs assessment, a landscape analysis, as they called it. And we have right now of the 10 accredited, we'll just do the whole scan. So of the 14 centers, only 30% had more than 10 full-time staff. And those were our big centers, like our 7 counties, like our New Vista, our Pennyroyal regions. We had some that had 5 to 10 FTAs, but the chunk that had less than 5. So those call centers are usually not even just independent call centers. They're operating in an adult residential substance use unit. So that call taker is also a CSU staff. So they're watching and monitoring the CSU while also taking these very life-threatening calls. So we're really working to try to get funding to pull those out to become just independent call centers. So folks aren't having to do double duty, but that's what they've had to do to kind of, make do at this point. Now, right now we have approximately 70 call takers across the state through all of the regions. By July of 2022, which is only a couple months, we need 170. Have you guys tried to hire staff recently? This is again a huge area. Now you might recognize that this call right here, this 120, that doesn't match our NSPLs because this 120,000 calls is the NSPL calls combined with the local crisis calls. So we've combined that. That's the volume we have across the state. And you'll see that there's a significant increase. One of the primary functions of one of our primary values in building 988 is that we want to have provider wellness. And provider wellness means that folks get breaks, folks get good supervision, folks get, support. So we've increased the number and the ratio of call takers to supervisors. So that is one area that we've really said, hey, we need more folks supporting these call takers because imagine talking to someone on their very worst day in crisis. You need time, you need support, you need all of those kind of things. So And just, I want to put up there, and this is in comparison to 911, our PSAPs, or I always forget what PSAP stands for, but it's your actual telecommunicator dispatch facility. So there are 116 PSAPs, or 911 call centers, with an average of 10 full-time staff and 2 part-time staffs per centers. So we have a little bit of room for growth as compared to our 911 counterparts. Now, what is 988? You're like, whoosh, Beck, we've only been talking about this for a minute. Now you get to what 988 is. So 988, quite simply, is a number change. At its very basic, strip everything away, 988 is saying, I'm going to take 10 digits, the 1-800-273-TALK, and I'm going to make it 988. That's all it is. Like Becky talked to us for 50 minutes about a 3-digit number change. It's way more than that. But kind of if you strip everything away, now the 1-800 number is still going to be accessible. So if folks still have that magnet plugged up on their, right next to their rotary dial phone, somebody's still going to answer that 1-800 number. But we're going to add right now about 97% of wireless calls will automatically be routed. So I didn't mention this. This number 988 does not go live until July of 2022. So don't encourage people to call this until July of 2022. Don't advertise it until July of 2022. Again, it is not a valid working number until July of 2022. Now, if I use my AT&T phone here and I call 988, AT&T is like, oh, I know this routing. So they're going to route it for you to the 10-digit number, but we're not advertising it right now, also because of capacity. So we're not advertising. You guys are getting a sneak peek because Vanessa and Lee asked me to, but we are not advertising 988 right now. So the vision is, if you have an emergency, a police, fire, rescue emergency, you call 911. I keep saying, if your house is on fire, call 911. If your brain is on fire, call 988. We want something easy to remember, something accessible, all of those kind of things. So that's the whole vision. That's the whole premise of 988. And there's a long history about it. Started in 2018. Again, Congress didn't just wake up and be like, this is it. Throw a dart. This started in 2018, and as just an exploratory phase. SAMHSA said, yeah, let's look at this. In 2019, they officially designated 988 as the number because they were thinking, do we replace 211? Do we replace 811 dig? Like, there was only so many N11 numbers available, right? So they did this whole thing. They finally come up with 988, and it will be readily available again in July of 2022. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline Designation Act said, yes, this is the behavioral health crisis line that everybody in the nation is going to be able to use. And here's some funding. So this happened through our ARPA and our CARE monies, and also through some other federal funding and grants. So 988 is one number, right? But it's a movement as well. It's saying our crisis continuum needs to come into the 21st century. And we're going to use this newly funded, newly familiar, this new entry point of 988. We're going to use it as a movement to enhance services across the whole continuum, right? So instead of it just being someone to talk to, 988 is also a part of building someone to respond, and also building a community to support that caller or that call taker. So does this look familiar to folks? Someone's in crisis, someone calls 911, that police officer, through their own SOPs, again, they're great electricians, but through their own SOPs, they were like, I have 2 options. Or if EMS comes, I have 1 option, ED. Right now, EMS can transport to a non-medical place because of a waiver, but traditionally they have to go only to the ED, right? They only get paid to take that client to the ED. Now, again, as someone who's experienced this, I needed neither of these. I needed just some support, right? We've had national examples that folks have waited in the emergency department for upwards of 3 weeks to get crisis services. That's not in Kentucky, thank goodness, because I'd have a lot more to say about that. But the ED also, if you've been there, is not a calm place. And if you're in a behavioral health crisis, it's not going to soothe your soul. Again, they're fabulous roofers, but I need a plumber, right? And so thinking about that, we also want to humanize a behavioral health crisis. You know, if the ambulance is like, I'm not taking them, they're too risky. If the police have to transport someone in a behavioral health crisis, by their standing operated procedures, they have to be handcuffed and they have to be put in the back of the car. Again, they're doing what their standing operated procedures tells them, that they're operating out of their lens. And so we need to expand that. So 988 is an entry point. It's a knock on the door to say, hey, we need more. And this is kind of what we hope that 988 can help build. That before we even get to that crisis, we have warm lines, we have peer supports, we have family peer supports, we have all of this community support before a person even gets to a crisis. So it can be avoided. Where we've destigmatized mental health and we've increased the help seeking, right? So then we want to see that, we have CIT trained officers. We have one of the greatest CIT trainings out there. But if we do need law enforcement, we need folks to make sure that they're trained specifically, right? But what we're trying to build is this 988 behavioral response, where in Austin, Texas, they've operated this behavioral response as like a fourth wing of a 988 or 911 dispatch. So it's not fire, it's not EMS, it's not police, it's actual behavioral health experts that go out in their van or whatever they're in, and they respond. Now that's Austin. It's not quite as yet as Kentucky, but we'd like to build that, right? So the someone to respond is, we want to build and to fund and to, make billable those folks, right? So we also know that some folks don't need to leave their home. The answer in crisis isn't always to leave your home, to be taken somewhere. The answer might be to build community support. So maybe that's a neighborhood, response team, or maybe that's using your extension off, whatever it might be. We're really encouraging communities to think about, how do I support someone in this home? How do I support someone in our community? So that could be using way more peer supports, that could be using kind of medication management, all of these different things. So if someone does have to be taken somewhere in a way that, again, is humanizing, we want to make sure our EDs are trained. They know how to get folks in and out of there, assess them, have beds, have a bed registry available. So one of the big things we're looking at funding is a bed registry for behavioral health. So they can look at a map and say, oh, I know in North Key, they have a bed here at St. Elizabeth's, or they have a bed here, all of these things. So we need an active bed registry statewide so that we can be seeing this in real time. We need more partial hospitalization. In Arizona, they have integrated models of behavioral health hubs. They have a medical doctor on to assess for withdrawal or to assess for any of these kind of things. They have a whole system in one hub area that can treat the whole person. So that's substance use, that's medical care, that's all of it. They've created these kind of behavioral health integrated models. And also the police have direct access to this back door where they can get the person there, they're in and out in 10 minutes. So the police are back on doing their job in the streets, and they are in and out and have that person out of the back of that cop car in 10 minutes. And so there's lots of great community models or city models. We're hoping to be the first state model. So there's that. I'm looking at my time too. All right. So you'll see more funding for living room models or for kind of Dusty. Yes. We know that there are specific things that have to happen for when our younger folks call. And we're very aware of that need. And also there's a Garrett Lee Smith grant that just dropped that we'll be applying for that will help try to make sure that there is an adolescent lens and pathway available for youth as well. So their bed registry will also look at what are children's units available. And Christy has been absolutely phenomenal in bringing that adolescent need to our 988 work. So, yep, awesome. Yeah, because we've had kiddos, I'm preaching to the choir here, but younger and younger kiddos have been really experiencing these behavioral health crises. And so, yeah, we have to kind of figure it out all the way down to the elementary school. Great point, Dusty. So how do we do this? How are we doing this right now? This will, in April, will be our year of meeting and working as a Kentucky 988 coalition. So this coalition has about 70 members on it. I've lived in towns in Kansas that were smaller than our coalition. And it is got all the things happening, right? Because of the size of it, we have broken our we've broken our statewide coalition into 6 subcommittees or subgroups. I don't love the image of a subgroup, but I'm trying to find language for that. They're equally as important. They're just not as part of the whole anyways. So if anybody's familiar also with the Zero Suicide Framework, these 6 absolutely model the lead authorized trained partner guide philosophy. So we meet monthly with our call directors and really have started to create a network of connected, it's a real peer support group for call directors. They're saying, hey, do you have this policy? Or hey, how do you deal with known callers? Or where we're working with them to kind of expand their relationships and their connections because they're doing the work. They're the ones, they're the ones doing the stuff. So it's been so cool to watch and be a part of those meetings. We also have a 988 marketing. Now we will not actively be marketing 988 until the earliest of 2023, because of the need for this. We have to make sure people are there to answer the calls. Someone's there to respond before we start marketing this. So you all are hearing it now for a couple of reasons, but you won't see large statewide scale marketing until the earliest of 2023, most likely 2024. We have been working with our 911 PSAP, law enforcement, EMS, statewide partners, and even regional partners, and have a 988 911 working group where we're looking at creating SOPs at the state level to say, here's how to hand off a call. Because we have really worked with this philosophy of no wrong number, that if someone does call 911 because it's a known number, that 911 can say, hey, this sounds like a behavioral health emergency where we might not need law enforcement, where we might not need EMS. Let me transfer you to a 988 center so you can be a part of that 80% that doesn't need a response, that just needs someone to talk to. So we're working at and you can imagine our 911 partners are quite nervous about this because what happens if they transfer someone and then something, so we're really, really working at those SOPs and that state level guidance for how to transfer back and forth. Interoperability is a word I've become quite familiar with. But yeah, so there's that. And Christy here, she heads up our exam section and our 988 quality assurance. So are we doing what we say we're doing? Is what we're doing working? Are we getting feedback from callers? Are we getting feedback from folks who have used mobile crisis? How do we know that what we're doing is person-centered, is all of those things? Also, Vanessa, we're till 11:30 or 11:15? 11:30. Oh, I almost had like a mini freak out right then. Did you see me look at my clock? I freaked out. Anyways, all right. So, and then as mentioned before, we have a group that is specifically lived and loss experience. They're not there in a professional capacity. They're there because they themselves or they have lost someone to suicide. And this group is really our, like I said, our true north. They're really telling us, is what we're doing, is it best practice for those who might need it? And also they're helping inform our mobile crisis. Do you guys know that they are packets for our corners? They're packets for our funeral homes. They're packets for schools to be able to give to folks that says, hey, here's a group of folks that have had this experience, and here's support groups for them. Here's, things that they have found helpful. So we're really looking at building those partnerships to say our mobile crisis has pamphlets that are lived and lost informed and developed to give to folks that they're leaving, like family members at the scene, all of those kind of things. So they're really, I just have such deep respect for the way that they're working and again, kind of advising and helping us. And now the real reason you guys are getting this as a preview is our advocacy wing. I can't talk a lot about this because I'm a state employee, but if you know Marcy Timmerman or Megan Cole, they can talk your ear off about it. So you're like, Beck, that's a really great map you just showed us, but do you know how much that's going to cost? We actually do know how much all that's going to cost. And so we have worked with our advocacy partners to, I'm going to click through here. Yeah, there it is. So we're going to fund this in 3 different ways. The fancy word is we're going to be using some braided funding. So we're going to be using some of our behavioral health block grant money. We're going to be using some Medicaid funding. And we're encouraging folks to look at House Bill 373. So if you guys look at your cell phone right now, there's a 70-cent fee every month for 911 services. A lot of folks don't know that, right? So for $8.48, you are participating in funding someone to answer your 911 call. Our advocates have suggested a similar 988 fee be placed on monthly subscribing wireless phones. So we know that equity is an issue. We don't want to assess this fee to folks who we know might be using kind of prepaid phones or, there's another term for those things. So we're only wanting to assess this fee on folks that have monthly subscriptions to their phones. And again, for $8.40, you can help fund that whole map. That fee equals, anywhere up to like $17 million when we look at the number of wireless phones in Kentucky. So this is no small chunk of money. And that money, according to this bill that's proposed and has bipartisan support, that money would be overseen by a 988 service board, similar to 911. So there's a service board that makes and it's an independent agent. It's not part of the state. It's not part of DCBS. It's not part of DVID. It's a independent board that oversees that money and would direct that money to call centers, to mobile crisis, to do all of those kind of things. So I can't tell you what to do with it, but I can tell you that right now there's House Bill 373. So do with it what you might, but it will be a part of a committee hearing very shortly. So that's part of how we're going to pay for it. Now, the important thing too is that 988 will never dip into or cannot dip into that 911 number, that 911 fee. They have to be completely separate or we lose the opportunity for federal funding, period. So it's very, very important that there's clear avenues to where that money goes and how it's spent. There's been, I think, three to five, sorry for not knowing exactly, states that have already passed a similar fee. For example, Washington, they have a graduated fee. It's going to start at 12 cents. And over the next 3 to 5 years, will go up, I think, all the way to 40 to 45 cents per month for wireless phone. So that's one way. And also Medicaid has a mobile crisis planning grant right now where they're trying to look at what is the SPA, what are all these other Medicaid words I don't fully understand, but I hear a lot. Like how can we get these mobile crisis reimbursable? How can we get our living room models, our 23-hour crisis units, how can we help get them funded? So we're working very closely with Medicaid, and they're doing an entire environmental scan, needs assessment, landscape analysis to kind of see what's happening. So the relationship between 988 and 911 is one of our kind of our biggest building areas. We want to be in partnership. We want to, like I said, be a handshake away. For those of you who've done suicide prevention work or intervention work, we want there to be a smooth and seamless, warm handoff, either one way or the other. So from 988 to 911, if there's an imminent risk, and from 988 or from 911 to 988. So that's been a huge area. Let me go back because I forgot to say something. So we have right now one statewide 988 coalition. I think you all RIACs are probably going to be familiar with this model, but we are going to be asking the CMHCs to create their own regional 988 coalition, where they're working directly with their law enforcement, with their PSAPs, with their lived experience folks. So again, I think it's a familiar model for you all, but we're going to be working with those regional coalitions very shortly. So also those might look like your CIT groups. So, Dusty making sure what are our schools a part of that coalition? How are we getting involved and aware of what's going on in those regional 988 coalitions? And those are starting to get built. I know Communicare's doing theirs. I know Pennyroyal's got one. New Vista's meeting with theirs as a part of their CIT. So it kind of just depends on your region where that regional 988 coalition might be happening. And I'm looking at my dear RPC friend Jamie here because our crisis call centers might need a little help in doing that state level or that regional level coalition. So how can we encourage our RPCs to be a part and use their awesome skills at coalition building? So going back to here. Now, again, I mentioned marketing. You'll see more. We also want feedback, what works, what doesn't work, what indicates the similarities and differences between 988 and 911, and kind of all of those things. So that's marketing and messaging. Lee, are we ready for our first poll? Now, when I Googled poll, tell me why these two cows come up. Like I Googled image poll. These are apparently poll cows. There's a whole breed of poll cows. So I learned something today, and I hope that maybe you also learned that there's cows called polls. So take a look at this survey. Tell us what you think about, is 988 this? Is 988 this? Tell us what you think. I might have inadvertently tricked you by talking about movement last. But our answer is D, both A and C. It is a number as well as a movement. A poll cow. I know also the poll on an animal is the horny hump. I went down a whole rabbit hole this morning, y'all. A whole poll hole. That's where I went down. So Google's a place to get lost. All right, thanks, Lee. Yeah, so we know that 988 in its bareness is a number. It is a crisis behavioral health response number, but also it's being kind of used as a movement to enhance and improve our crisis continuum. So thanks for participating in that poll. And now let's talk about questions. What's your takeaways? What's your concerns? What are you worried about? I do not love this analogy because it was definitely overused in our early pandemic days, but we are building this ship as we go. We're building this plane as we go, whatever it is. But and we want to have the critical thinking and the critical analysis of this. Like what's going to work? What are not going to work? What are you totally in the dark about still that I didn't answer? So yeah, let's open it up to some questions, response, comments.
So I thought I knew the answer to this, but then later I think I confused myself. So is 988 available now or in July?
It will both.
Okay.
It nationally and state will like be absolutely available to all landline and wireless lines in July of 2022. But right now, most people who call from a wireless phone, like 97% of folks that call from a wireless phone, will automatically be transferred to their NSPO. So we're not advertising it again, because the worst thing that could happen is we advertise it and no one's there to answer it. So we're being very methodical in saying the earliest you can call is July of 2022.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mhm. You all have the group has gotten the most comprehensive look at this. So please provide your feedback, because I think that we're going to be doing this quite a bit moving forward. Other questions, thoughts?
Beck, I want to thank you for coming today and providing this information. And I love that you've allowed us to preview this early. You know, my time is spent in the world of RIAC. And so as you're talking about this, you know, I'm making connections in my mind on how RIACs can contribute to the awareness of this. And so I think that this session allows us that time for planning. And
Right.
so with the coalition that you were talking about, I'm hoping my goal for that is that someone from the coalition will also be able to attend RIAC as well, to kind of provide that partnership and that collaboration. So
Right.
thank you for coming and providing this today. I really do appreciate it. It's great information.
Well, thanks. And yeah, that's like, we want the communities and regions to own this, right? Like we want to be able to provide the resources, but we want this to be owned, like all things we try to do, like at that community and region. And that's the last thing that I like really want you guys to think about, and maybe put in the chat, like, where do you fit right now? Just after this hour and 15 minutes, like, where do you think you fit? How can you be a part of this 988 movement? You can come off mute and say that, or you can put it in the chat. Like, let's talk about it.